What is a hero? A mythological figure, often of divine descent, endowed with great strength or ability? An illustrious warrior? No. It's a person admired for achievements and noble qualities, one who shows great courage. Welcome to the What's a Hero podcast, where we dive deep into what a hero is and what makes them that hero. I'm your host, Ken Fraunfelter, and I'm going to be introducing you to some of the world's most likely and unlikely heroes. You may have never heard of them before, and they most likely have never met you. But they all have one thing in common. They are ready to do whatever it takes to help make you better, even if it means sacrificing everything for you. Let's get into it.
This is episode 47 of the What's a Hero podcast with me, Ken Fraunfelter. You know, you think about things all the time, and you know, some of the things that I think about are like what the origin of things are. Why do we do the things that we do, and which is kind of the basis for the podcast. You know, I'm trying to figure out why heroes are the way that they are. How did they grow up to become who they are, that they just want to serve and they want to sacrifice for other people. And so one of the things that I think about is like the history of whatever organization. So police history. I have a bit of knowledge about that, and I know about it, and it's very interesting, and I see where it comes from. And you go back to England, you go back to all these different places that said, hey, we need people to be there to be police officers. Another thing that I think about is the history of firefighters. My grandfather was a firefighter. He's lifelong. That's all he wanted to do. He was also a reserve police officer, which was kind of cool. However, he was a full-time firefighter down in LA County. And he just loved being a firefighter. He loved doing what he did. And, you know, I would see pictures all over their house when I was a kid of old engines and old trucks and stuff like that, you know, stuff going back to the 30s and 40s and even before then. And so you wonder, where does this come from? Well, as our nation began, you know, things started on the East Coast and kind of moved, you know, like with everything else, just moved westward. Well, there's an old world. There's just an old world thing about East Coast stuff and stuff on the East Coast. And today's guest is actually a firefighter from the East Coast who. And when we think about East Coast, we think about New York or whatever, sure. But you think of New England, because that's what we were. We were in England, but then we became over to the United States. We have the colonies, and then they get New England over there. So a lot of the birth of what we have comes from there. Well, today's guest is a firefighter from New England, and he's going to give us a whole bunch of, I'm assuming we're going to get a history lesson, but we're also going to get a knowledge of what it is that kind of what it's like to be a firefighter over in pretty much where the United States, the American firefighter came from is that general area. And we don't think about it as much as we should in that respect. But, today's guest is going to give us kind of open our eyes on that. He's a 21-year veteran firefighter and EMT. He's got a lot of complexities. You know, we talked to Amanda Coleman a while back. She always talked about being an onion, right? She's got a lot of layers. This gentleman has a lot of layers. He's currently an advocate for PTSD and mental illness in first responders, and he's involved in peer support, social media support groups, and he does a lot of public speaking. So we have a lot that we can glean from this gentleman. And so without further ado, I want to introduce to you guys Keith Hanks. How you doing, Keith?
Doing good, Ken. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. So where exactly? So you are New England itself, right?
I'm in New Hampshire in New England. I'm in southern New Hampshire. I'm actually, if you look at a map, if you look at Mount Monadnock, which is the number one height mountain in this country, I am 2.5 miles from the base of it.
Nice. That's pretty cool. Beautiful. Yeah, it's got to be, because you're not going to get the highest mountain and have it just be kind of a whole bunch of skyscrapers and stuff next to it.
No. It's the boondocks out here.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. So you were a firefighter for a number of years, huh? Just a couple days or a couple weeks or what?
This was 21 years. I I was on in Massachusetts. I never actually worked on a fire department in New Hampshire. When I retired, I moved up here. So I was actually on 2 different municipal fire departments down in Massachusetts. And I got on when I was 18. I got in as a call member, which is very similar to a volunteer idea. Only we get paid, and we do have shifts from time to time. And I was 18. I was 18 December of my senior year. I was a firefighter. And
the rest is history.
It is. And it's funny because, like, this, you hear about firefighters, and you allude to it in your intro about the history of it. And my family is no exception to that. There's a legacy in my family that dates back to 1875 with a member, at least one member from each generation serving. And it's a hell of a legacy to have. It's something I'm still proud of these days. So when it came time for me to be, or I should say, of the age to do so, I did. I actually went through all my initial training before my 18th birthday. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So let's go back then, since we're talking history. Who's little Keith? What was he? What was his deal? What did he do?
Oh wow, man! Little Keith in New England back in the '80s, huh? A lot of Atari, a lot of arcades. I don't know, a lot of great cartoons. That's little Keith.
Yeah, just playing outside, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, kids actually did that. We did that when we were young.
Yeah,
we weren't on a tablet or on our wrist phones or whatever.
Riding bikes until lights come on, until your mom's saying you get inside or whatever, huh?
That was the dinner bell, man. The porch light back in the day.
Yeah,
it was the dinner bell.
Yeah,
it was. My story's weird because like I talk to people about like growing up in a firefighting family, and there's military in my family too on both sides. So it was a very disciplined household, and when I talk to people about like how I grew up, like I spent most of my weekends at the fire station. And when you become like a teenager and you start talking about like, things you do besides playing with Legos, and like you get into a conversation and someone's like, what do you mean you spent 2 hours at the firehouse rolling hose? You're 12, and
right.
For me, that's normal. That was normal. That was, you mess up during the week and you upset one of the adults, you're up at the firehouse rolling hose or whatever.
Wow, and that's cool. Cause a lot of times you go back to school on Monday or whatever. You do anything this weekend? No, I just sat around or whatever. And you're telling a story. Oh, I was at the firehouse for so long. I was rolling hose, I was figuring out how to, I'd move some tools around. We were going through different stuff, and that would be just so different than a lot of kids go through or had the knowledge of.
Yeah, and it's also when you get to that point where like, because obviously I used to get taken to the fires that my uncles and different relatives would be at. And stuff. So, to have one of your friends in school be like, what do you mean you went to watch a fire? Like, what is that? And try to explain that to someone that's our lifestyle. Our lives get interrupted by these things happening. And therefore we become part of them. We want to go see what's going on. That's right. Just people who aren't in the life don't necessarily get that.
Right. So I'm assuming, and this is, like you said, 12 years old or whatever. So as you're going through middle school and you're going through high school, you knew what was up. You knew what was the trajectory of your life was then, huh?
Yeah, I pretty much knew. I was never discouraged. I shouldn't say I was never discouraged from doing anything else. Like when I got into high school and I was like, they do like career day and you go and like do, they have different programs and stuff you can partake in. And it was never discouraged when I showed interest in anything else, but it was never encouraged to do anything but firefighting.
Oh, right.
Looking back on it, wouldn't change a thing, obviously, but at the same time, it's like, they really didn't make a lot of options for me or say, hey, you want to be a cook? Go be a cook.
Yeah. Here, let me show you how to change oil. Maybe be a mechanic one day, or let me show you how to let's go ride horses or something. That's not.
Computers were a big thing when I was in high school. Hey, go learn computers. Maybe that was never encouraged. You're going to be a buckethead. That's what you're going to be.
That's it. And that's all your options were. But I would assume that you weren't dismayed from that. You were like, no, that's cool. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. I like doing that stuff, right?
Yeah, man. That's what you grow up with. I knew I was going to do it. It didn't necessarily mean that that's all I ever wanted to do, but I knew I was going to do it. I knew it. Right. The funny story, when I first applied, I actually got a letter saying no. to the department that's been in my family at that point for 135 years. And there was this big discussion. What do you mean you gave my nephew a no? Yeah, he's hired, and so at first I had like this letdown, at the end of my junior year when I first applied.
Yeah.
And, obviously I got on.
Was it just age at that point? Is that why they said no?
Yeah, because I was actually the only person who wasn't over 18, and it was my family that got me in. And these days that wouldn't fly up here, but it did back then, 1996.
Yeah. So you're going through all that stuff, and you said that there were you may have thought about other things. What were the other things that you may have thought you might go do?
There was always a strong connection with cooking in my family, especially with my grandmother. I didn't have either grandfather in my life. My grandmother and I were very close. So it was a long time, but I wanted to be a chef. And then lo and behold, I become a firefighter, and I learned how to cook.
Right.
Because we can all cook.
That's right. Yeah, that's one thing. You go in there in the morning, you smell bacon. If you go in a firehouse, you smell bacon or sausage or something cooking. In the evening, it's usually fajitas, at least the station around here.
That and coffee. There's always a pot of coffee.
Yeah, there's always a coffee going. So, all right. So 18, you apply again at the end of your senior year, and you said, "I'm going in," and that's it, huh? And that's what they said. Senior year. And they said, "Cool, you're in." And so you said you did kind of volunteer, but you got paid for it, and you worked some shifts. And so how did that work? What did that entail?
So most on call, of course, we're dating back, mid to late 90s. It's not really much different now, but most on call and volunteer fire departments work on a pager system. You get issued a fire department pager. Obviously people have police scanners in their house, and when they need your help, they tone you out. There's a special alert that goes off in the pager. The members respond to the station and go to work. And the department I started out on was it had a full-time chief and one full-time firefighter, and the rest of the members were all had other jobs. And so we quote unquote volunteered to be on call members. Obviously we got paid, so it's different than a volunteer in that respect, but it's essentially the same idea. We live at home. We don't live at the station. And a lot of departments in the country majority of the fire departments in this country are staffed that way.
And what was your job that you did? What were you doing at the time?
My full-time job?
Yeah.
My regular paid job?
Yeah, the pay you money job. Yeah.
I was actually, I worked at Walmart when I was in high school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I was a Walmart shelf stalker and a punk, to say the least,
Yeah.
And,
aren't they
so
all?
I went from doing like that to running around in fire trucks.
So you finally get to a certain point where you say, I want to go do this full time. I want to get not just paid for it, but I want to do it full time, and I want to just be able to focus on that. When did that happen?
So I sort of did like a transition between the on-call work and then doing like sort of routine shifts. So I would have a shift every so many days, whatever. And then I had a regular permanent schedule with the fire department starting in 2005 or 2006, sorry. But I had been working private EMS before that full time since 2001. Private EMS was a little easier when it came to testing to be able to get on the job and start working. For a lot of civil service fire departments were harder to get tested through for different reasons. So I had actually been working in private EMS for almost 5 years by the time I started working permanent shifts for the firehouse. That's
cool. And so you were in fire service during 9/11.
Yep.
Did that have an effect on you as far as did you guys send folks down there? Or?
I knew people who went down. None of the agencies around us officially sent anyone. But there were a lot of the guys we knew from different departments that did volunteer to go down. It was a weird day, we were young, and it was right before my 23rd birthday, and I had one kid at that time, and I was married to my first wife, and that day it made us realize as first responders when the 343 FDNY guys died and all the other responders, it made us realize just how quick and how short life is. And, it lasted that way for a long time, for us as responders, at least.
Yeah. And I've been there a couple times, and I see that, and I know that there's a lot of guys, especially from the East Coast, that went there because they were close enough, but they just wanted to lend a hand. And I know guys that flew across the country, or at least went across the country and said, I'm here. How can I help? And they had so many people helping that they had to start turning people away because they just didn't have jobs for them to do, And so there's a church, and you might be familiar with it. There's a church right near Ground Zero, and it's been there since 1700s or whatever. And it has a I guess a cloak that the priest would wear, but on his robes there's just patches from all these other departments, whether police or fire or whatever, folks that came and helped, and there's patches. And so the point where he's wearing these robes where he's doing mass or something, and they had to hold his arms up because the robes were so heavy with patches.
Right. Yeah.
And so you go in there and you see that, and you're right. It does show you there's just it is a heavy spirit that's there that shows that life was short, and you never know what's going to happen, and you never know who's going to be the person that's going to sacrifice everything for what you have. And so I'm assuming, getting back to our story and yours, is that had a whole different air, especially over there at that time, right over on the East Coast, because it's a whole different world.
What's weird is there's always an animosity between the Boston and New York, the Yankees and the Red Sox, right? And there even is with fire and police, right? It's that same joking spirit, ball busting kind of stuff.
Yeah.
When 9/11 happened, we were all just the same department. And, that didn't matter if it was just, outside of New York or up here where we are outside of Boston or even Maine. All of us were just, and I think we were across the country, but because we're so close to New York, I'm only 3 hours from New York City. It was very close knit. And when you did go there in the weeks and months after, you were very welcomed in when they found out you were, a brother or a sister firefighter.
Right.
It was very strong family atmosphere down in that area. And even around here, after 9/11, it was terribly great, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I went to New York just a couple of years ago, and like you said, once they find out you do it, you're a firefighter, police officer, whatever. I was talking to a police officer, and I told him that I was a cop, and he's like, "You're on the job, hey!" And so he's super New Yorky, right? But he was just so welcoming and so friendly, and everyone that I've spoken to since, and when I go, it's the same thing. They're just cool, and so there's just a different attitude, like you said, of people that we can make fun of you, but nobody else can make fun of you. We're it's like family, it's like brothers, and even if you don't know each other, you just find out, you've been through the same crap, and so it makes a difference. So
it's great out there.
Yeah. So you're going through that time, and you realize, so you said 2005 that
it's when I started working permanent shifts of the firehouse. Yeah. But I was already working full time in private EMS.
Right. And so you're paramedic, were you running an ambulance at the time?
Yeah, I was running on an ambulance as an EMT. Yeah.
Okay. And so you do that, then you go to fire department, and and that was it. You're good to go. Your dream is fulfilled, right?
That's it, man.
That's
Boots in the ground, ready to go to work.
So what happened with it? Was it as easy as you thought? Obviously you've been pulling hose since you were 12, but there's a whole bunch of different stuff that's now coming on, because this is what you do full time now. You get to focus on this. That's all you have to worry about.
It's weird. I was always told it was going to be a hard job. I was going to see a lot of bad things. I was going to watch people die. I was going to see burnt kids. It was going to be, you're going to see bad stuff, but no one ever in all my family who did it. At one point, there was 3 members in my family who were doing it at the same time. Not one of them ever said, this is how you're going to deal with it, or there's going to be help there when you need to deal with it, or when this starts affecting you because you're drinking or drugging or whatever it is, or having nightmares, or whatever it is, this is what we're going to do. No one ever said that.
Right. They talk about, hey, you're going to go through X amount of marriages. You're gonna see this crap. But yeah, that's a thing that you don't think about, is nobody says, okay, so here's how you get to deal with it, and here's how you should guard yourself against it. So I'm assuming you saw lots of stuff that just ate at you, huh?
There was a lot of times when I talk about this stuff, I always refer back to when I was still just, and I don't mean just, but only doing the on-call work.
Mm-hmm.
My first really bad fire was 3 months after I got sworn in when I was 18. So here I am 3 months into my 18th birthday, because I actually got sworn in 2 days after my 18th birthday. And so I'm still very young. Here I am. It's a Sunday morning and we get a really bad fire where an elderly couple, they were like in their mid 80s. The woman was dying. She wanted to die. The husband's like, I don't want to live without you. So I'm going to set the house on fire, slit my wrists, and walk back in and burn with you. And I wasn't the first truck that got there. And our fire chief had actually gone in to get her. And he went, he was unraisable on the radio for almost 5 minutes. And so we thought we lost him.
Uh-huh.
And here it is Sunday morning. I'm like, oh, we're going to a fire. Cool. I get to brag about a fire. And it ends up being one of my top 5 worst calls, because as I get there and get up to the lawn, the burnt woman, who I thought was a pile of blankets because she was that burnt, gets carried by me. The fire chief jumps out and I look off to my right and there's an old guy bleeding against the garage who's half burnt. And it's like, cool. 24 hours after that, I was sitting in a math exam in high school and I failed it, obviously.
Because your mind was on other things, sure.
Yep.
And so you're dealing with that, and you're right. We don't think about, you said the top 5 in your top 5 worst ones. And if we think about just going to whatever call, whether it's fire, whether it's whatever, you just think about going to a call. And then because structure fires are the big thing that you guys train for. However, it's not, more often than not, you're doing extrication out of a car crash, or you're doing some kind of a, maybe a medical call. Like you said, you're an EMT. And so you're doing medical calls, lift assist, all this different stuff. And so when you get to actually do a structure fire, that's cool. I've got stories now. We're going to do this. We're going to knock this one out. We're going to be,
right.
But then it goes and becomes something so much worse and so much more lingering for you, right? That just stuck with you for a while.
Sticks with you for a long time. And and it builds up. We like to refer to, the trauma from the job as like a backpack. And the more and more you put in there, eventually it's going to weigh it down and whatnot. And the thing with with me, where I got on, essentially almost 26 years ago, things were so much different. I mean, even the critical incident stress meetings or CISMs, they weren't what they are now. You know what I mean? Like the first one I went to, they were like, hey, you guys want to talk about this? And everyone looked around and was like, no. And they're like, hey, coffee and donuts in the back, guys. And that was it. And we walked away within a half hour walking in, and this stuff piles up, and it piles up and piles up when you start doing it 5, 10, 15 years, and you're doing multiple facets of it. You're doing 2 different jobs. So for me, I was doing municipal fire and private EMS. And I was also, because we ran the ambulance in the fire, I was running ambulance calls in the fire. I'm doing 60, 70, 90 hours a week of work. And I'm going to 35 to 60 calls, a week, if not more, maybe close to 100. It piles up. And, and the thing a lot of people don't understand, the hardest thing for me to transition from being just working as an on-call, where I could go home in between the calls, or maybe even decide not to go on that next call, whatever it is. The biggest transition for me was living at the station or the base. And if you start your shift off at 7 a.m., with a really bad fire where someone died, guess what? At 9:30, when you were clear and you were back in service, you were going on whatever next call it was. There was no going home. You were there for 24 hours, and no matter how bad or good your shift started, you had to live with that for that entire shift. And that was a hard transition for me to start being like, wow, where do I put all this?
Yeah.
What do I talk to? That was a really bad morning.
Yeah. That's rough, because you don't think about, a lot of people have the ability, they can go talk to their, spouse, or they go talk to somebody. And if you don't have that opportunity, and especially somebody maybe a little more grizzled, a little more weathered, and he's been doing it a long time, and he's just, hey, I don't know how you get over it, and we're going to the next call, and just suck it up or whatever. And you don't think about it. But then, like you said, those critical incidents debriefs or whatever, those are great, but is somebody always going to want to talk? And we all got to be a man, especially, that's just how we think we're expected. And
right.
I think we lose that sometimes.
You get sucked down that wormhole. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
it's a dangerous path, and it's killing us. It's killing men and women in this profession, especially. And it's sad when, as first responders in the military, we represent 1% of the population, right?
Right.
Less than 1% of the population will join the military. Less than 1% will join the first responder world. As a whole, statistically speaking, we represent almost 20% of the nationwide suicides. Like that's crazy to think that 1% of the population is representing 20% of the suicides.
Yeah, that's such a disparaging number. I mean, we don't want to even have 1% of the suicides, but still, it's a huge amount, and we don't think about it, and a lot of people don't think about it, especially if you're not in that world. But we see it all the time. You see all sorts of different things that, whether we're part of social media, groups, or we're part of whatever, and you get things all the time. Like, how do we break this stigma? How do we do all that stuff? And we have to be open. We have to be willing to admit that we're human and that we need help.
We are just as human as the people we are trying to help and save.
Yep, exactly. So you are, you're a firefighter, basic level firefighter. Did you go through the ranks as far as becoming an engineer and becoming a lieutenant, battalion chief, anything like that, where you go through those ranks?
I stayed a grunt my whole career. Some of it was by choice. Some of it was from the way I carried myself, and sometimes the less appealing way chief officers would view me as a possible officer. So there's a little bit of both, I guess. But I stayed a grunt. I stayed a private my entire fire career. I got pretty heavy in the training, though. I went through my own school. I got my degree. I got my national one too. All the different fire stuff that guys get. But then I really like getting involved in training new people and stuff. So both in fire and EMS, I was a training officer on the fire side, and then I was actually a field training officer on the ambulance. So it was something I really enjoyed doing. That's
cool. And so, what besides EMT, obviously, but was everybody in your station house? Were they EMTs, or were they paramedics or anything like that, medically trained?
No, and even towards the end. So in the beginning, when I first got on the first department, it was EMS and fire were separate things. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the fire guys weren't EMTs as well. And even towards the end of my time there, it was still probably a 50-50. There was specific EMTs and there was specific firefighter EMTs. If you weren't EMT, you didn't work in the ambulance. But nowadays, a lot of departments are both across the board. Right.
Yeah, we had a guest on here, Frank, who he was going through just the details about how they go about doing what they do, and he was mentioning that everybody's they're cross trained. Everybody's a firefighter and a paramedic or EMT or whatever, and so you go back just 10 years or so, and you're not going to see that. You're not going to see that commonality that everybody had to be. So. What was your other than that? What was your other, I guess, specialty? What'd you like to do? What was one of your favorite things to do? Booting doors, crashing through windows.
Everybody always busts the firefighter, saving the cat, right? What's the big thing, And it was, I liked learning about the reason, the science behind fire, and that's what I did a lot with my degree, as I learned more about it. But it was always, when it came to the actual job itself. Every guy has their favorite call, and as corny as it is and as stereotypical it is, mine was, being in a fire, but it wasn't just because I was, putting the wet stuff and the red stuff. It was because, you were in basically a science experiment, and it is so, once you've been in a fuel and you're not like, shitting your pants every time you go to a fire, and you can actually enjoy what it is. Yeah. You can learn so much about everything, and it's very, I don't know. When I was doing it, back years ago, it was always something I looked forward to doing. And it sounds corny, and a lot of guys are like, oh yeah, typical buckethead, let's go to fires. But it's really cool to watch a fire burn and see why it does what it does.
Yeah. So tell us about that one. What is that favorite story?
Favorite story.
That favorite fire you're talking about, where you're.
It's tough. It's, I like that we have this, we have an expression in the fire service called doorway dances.
Yeah.
And it goes back. There's always a guy on a crew or a guy in the department that always forgets a glove at the truck, or, forgets his helmet. And, we always used to, I was always included in the tougher group of guys in the department. So, I was always one of the ones busting someone else's balls. And, we always used to use that term and rag on people if they did that. And so I think it was around 2009, we get a fire in the middle of the night and everyone's out of the house when we get there. We do a really quick, or the first crew does a really quick search, finds the fire. It's in the basement. And I was there on the ladder truck that night. And they had a report of some cats still in the house. And so I was supposed to meet up at the front door because I was on the ladder truck by myself. And I was supposed to meet up with another guy at the door and go search for the cats. And lo and behold, I get to the door and he's like, let's go get this. And he looks back at me and I don't have my helmet on. And so I'm sitting there at the door and I'm like, I'm that guy, damn it. And so he's like, he passed me on the shoulder. He's like, you're a doorway dancer tonight. And here I am, after all these years of busting everyone else on doing it, here I am with my helmet, 100 feet down the road at the truck. Great, I'm not going to let this down. And I didn't.
Yeah, and having missing a glove, that's one thing. You kind of hide that or whatever. You can't hide a firefighter not having a helmet.
Yeah, no, not when you're 6'5", 250 pounds or whatever at the time. It was, you stand out like a sore thumb without the helmet. And if you don't have it on, you have everything else on, you stand out even more.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, but that's your, you get back to that story where you're talking about, being in the fire, having that knowledge of where it's going, how it's climbing, how it's, just becoming more, and having that knowledge, like it's going to go over this way or it's going to go over that way. That's got to be kind of relieving, even though you're in the midst of it. You still know what's going to happen next.
I guess it's like being confident in anything else, right?
Uh-huh.
I guess, for a mechanic who's never worked on a motor or done something to a running motor, the first time they go and work on a running motor, it's probably daunting. It's the same as a firefighter, you have more knowledge in it and you know more about it. You're going to be more confident when you have to go and do your job for quote unquote real, you know, and that was always, they do a pretty good training. A lot of times do a lot of good recruit training. You do learn some of the science. You actually go through fire behavior and all this other stuff. But when you actually get down to the science of it and stuff, you learn so much more. You know that when it hits a wall, it's going to do this. Certain building construction is going to cause a fire to grow this way. And it does.
Mm-hmm.
It builds your confidence. So you feel a little less, overloaded when you're in your average fire.
Right. Because you think about when people get nervous or they get worried or they get anxious about whatever and stuff, it's a lot of times because there's that unknown. There's that thing they don't know about. And they, I've seen a lot of people where they're just like, oh, I'm so worried about this. Well, why are you worried about it? Because I don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. So if you do know what's going to happen, are you less worried? Yeah, most of the time they are. Okay, I know what I can do and I know how to prepare for it. And that's the same deal. You have that knowledge of what something's going to do, fire or whatever. In your case, there's a level of being able to figure out what's going to happen next. There's always the unknown. There's maybe a pipe behind a wall that's a gas pipe or something nobody knows about, and it can go off or something. But that other side of it, okay, I'm going into this. If I stay over here on this side, I'm going to be okay because everything's over kind of on that side, and I can focus on working the fire from this angle or whatever. And that just got to give you some kind of a sense of relief, just having knowledge, which makes a huge difference. And that's cool. That's really cool. So, yeah,
it kind of goes back to being a New England firefighter. We are the oldest part of the country, and so we have a lot of old buildings.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what you learn, a lot of what, you learn for like an education-based knowledge, some of it goes out the window out here because like we got buildings that are almost 300 years old now that are still standing that we end up going to for fires. And, there's a lot of construction that's in this part of the country that's not in other parts, especially you hit the West Coast or like especially like Texas West. There's a lot of buildings out here you won't ever see out there because they knew after a while not to build them that way.
Yeah, that makes we don't connect everything, and everything is so much closer and European-esque. I guess European-esque would be kind of where you're just kind of packed in together and just build on top of each other. And when you start getting west, everything kind of just starts opening up, and it's a big difference. Yeah. So you're working fires, you're doing all that stuff as you're getting into into different things. You're seeing a multitude of traumatic stuff. You're seeing a lot of things that are just kind of eating at you and stuff like that. Talk about your mindset and as far as going through that stuff. And like you said, they don't tell you how to deal with it. How were you dealing with it at the time when you would see, crashes or burned bodies or whatever?
So there was, it was sort of like a buildup. I think all along, I had probably shown some signs of wearing down over the years. There was definitely times where I handled things worse than others. But, before I even become a firefighter, I already had childhood trauma. And so then you take that and then you start doing, a job where you're seeing the absolute worst of society, and it builds up even quicker. So your backpack's in my case, my backpack was already half full. Mm-hmm. And so I started seeing these things. And then for me, the first real time I hit my breaking point was in 2003. April of 2003, my first wife was killed in a car accident.
Oh, wow.
In which I was driving. And we had another couple with us. The other husband was also a firefighter. The firefighter I actually got on the job with. And
wow,
it broke me. And we had two young kids. I had a just over 2-year-old son and a 10-month-old daughter that I had to go home to after that and tell them Mommy was never coming home. And that day, everyone saw a difference in Keith.
Oh, wow.
And I lost myself when that happened. And I slowly started feeling that the job was hitting me different. It was already sort of hitting me in a personal way, but now it was all personal all the time. Every accident I went to, it was my wife. Every time there was, whatever it was with a couple, it was my wife. And it really started tearing apart me. And right after I got in my accident, I drank a lot. I drugged a lot. I missed a lot of work. I became unreliable. I became angry. The anger lingered for years. Mm-hmm. But we didn't have a word. We didn't have a fancy acronym back then. We didn't have PTSD,
Right.
It wasn't until the military started coming back from the Middle East that we started seeing that, like, traumatic exposures doing something. And they went from calling it shell shock and battle fatigue, the PTSD, and now they realize that first responders are seeing it. So, but still, when I was going through some of my darkest times, we didn't know what was going on. We thought Keith was a prick. He's just an asshole who's angry because he's seen bad stuff.
Right. And it's amazing to think about it. We've known it. We live with it so much now, but yeah, in the early 2000s and 90s and 80s, we never called it that. You never thought about that. You just thought, yeah, the person's a jerk or whatever. And then we just called it shell shock. And you go back to World War I, there's videos on Netflix, YouTube, whatever, that documentaries that just show these guys and they're messed up. And then they would just say, get back to the front. And I can't, I'm not able to. There's no, and it carried on from then. And I guess it's been going on forever. And it's not documented, but you get all these different things. And so once we start caring about how people are reacting, and then the fact that they're taking it out on, their closest friends, or they're taking it out, they're getting in a car drunk or whatever, and they're driving into a crowd of people or something like that. You don't think about it like, okay, well, let's figure out the why on this really quick. Did you ever figure out, obviously you have now, but at the time, how long did that go on that you were just struggling?
I didn't, when I tell my story, I don't harp on the drinking and drugging as much because there's a lot, there's not a lot, but there are guys where that's more of a part of their story. For me, yeah. I don't consider the drinking and drugging part of my story. I turned inward and I got angry and I would self-harm. I had 6 suicide attempts, and this went on for a long time. This went on for a very long time. It was not until I was on a different fire department and working for a different private EMS organization in 2015 when I finally hit another breaking point and ended up needing some serious help. And I went to a place up here in Massachusetts, which is called On-Site Academy. is for strictly for first responders and veterans, and it's like a retreat in a way. They do some counseling, and they do like meditation, yoga, Reiki, and like massage therapy and acupuncture. They do like holistic stuff, and there's like they host an AA meeting, but it's a residential program where you stay 3 or 5 or 30 days or whatever you need.
Right.
And that was really our first taste for me and my current wife. That was our first taste of, hey, we may have an idea what's going on, because I actually started talking about stuff.
Was that somebody pushing for you to talk, or did you just you get so filled up that it's just kind of spilling out?
So the department I was on at the time had a prior line of duty death before I got on, but while I was on my other department. So they had, when that happened, they actually had reached out and gotten the services of this on-site academy. And so when I started really showing signs around the firehouse, the fire chief had gone through their program and said, hey, listen, I think you may be able to use this. I don't know, whatever. It was still not really talked about. He kind of felt uncomfortable, telling me to go someplace where he got help to get help. And,
right.
And so I did. And it helped, I think it helped. My wife always tells me that it helped in a way that we knew what direction we needed to go. It didn't help in the manner, for me at least, of healing. It actually sent me backwards a little bit. And, I got more help that year. 2015 was a really bad year. I think total I missed like 4 months of work.
Wow.
Being inpatient. So that's 4 months for my family, in and out. And, I started journaling, which started to help. The journaling kind of became more of a writing, and that slowly has become what is hopefully soon this year will be my book. I'm finished kind of getting it together. And so I'm doing that. I'm journaling. I'm getting some stuff out. I finally get trauma therapy, real trauma therapy. I'm talking about bad calls. I start getting comfortable, and I start talking what happened to me as a kid. And then once I get out what happens to me as a kid, all of a sudden there's like a light switch. It's like, holy crap, I can feel something different. It's like, it was like, I don't know if you ever heard of that game Kerplunk that we had back in the 80s. It's like this tube, and it's got holes, but straws through these holes, different angles, marbles.
I remember it.
Pull out enough of those straws, and the marbles come out, right? That's literally what it was like when I actually started being honest with a trauma therapist and myself. I started seeing that it wasn't just, the fires in the middle of the night where everyone lost everything, or the dead babies, or the bad accidents where an entire couple is killed, whatever it is. It wasn't just the job. It was all the personal shit I had been carrying. My wife, I lost custody of my kids for a while, the drinking, the drugging, the people going into my life, my father and I, all the things that regular people go through were affecting me upon what the job I do was doing.
Because just compounding at this point, right?
And where does it go? That backpack was already half full, 20 years ago when I first got on the job. And now it has all this, whereas it's just flowing out. And so 2017, I after a long talk with, the powers that be and my wife, I'm like, I gotta get out. This is bad. I'm now having panic attacks in the back of the rig. I'm not getting assigned training anymore because I'm not reliable. Like, this is my time. And so I retired, went on a disability. And, I felt very lost. I lost my identity. I was no longer Fireman Keith. I was no longer EMT Keith. I was no longer Training Officer Keith. In my mind, I had nothing for no one to look up to me for. And so I lost my purpose, and I started spiraling again. And here I go. I'm going down again. Right. And, it's a long journey. It's a long journey. 2017 I retired in October from everything. And it was the longest 3 months of my life to get into 2018. I swear to God, I have never spent so much time sitting on a couch in my life as I did those first 3 months. And I didn't know what to do with myself.
Because you just lost your meaning. You lost your purpose, right?
Just lost it. Yeah. I mean, at that point, with everything that was going on in my head that we hadn't completely sorted out, you take a guy who has PTSD, in my case, complex PTSD, and then you take his identity away from him. And you're like, okay, well, you don't have to work now. What do you mean I don't have to work? I got to go do this.
That's what I want.
I have to go. I have to be the one to go.
Because that was who you identified as. You identified as your job, right? As your firefighter.
Yeah, everything the job is.
And you're generational. It's also your I guess it's your cross to bear, because at this time in your life, you're the one in your family who's a firefighter, and you've been doing it since 1800s. This is what happens, has to happen. And so you're struggling at this point to try to figure out who you were, huh?
It was hard. I always thought that, my identity was that I was a firefighter and a first responder. I thought that was my purpose. And I was convinced of it for a while. And, I have, people always ask me, if you could go back knowing what you know now and knowing that you're going to go through everything you're going to, would you still do it? And I always tell them yes. However, I still know that the job isn't who I am. The job is able to exist because of who people like us are.
Right.
The job isn't us, in the sense of we're not identified by the job. The job is identified by us, because it takes a special person to be able to go and do that job in and out, decade after decade, year after year, losing time with their family. And I'm still convinced of that, to this day. And, I wouldn't change anything, but it's, the healing process, as they say, you do enough things for so long, it takes X amount of time in comparison to get through it. And, it went on for a while,
Yeah, I can, you're talking about that 3 months where you're just sitting on a couch trying to figure out what your next move is going to be. And I'm assuming at some point you had enough people that loved you and cared about you that came around you, and they pulled you off that couch. They got you moving, right?
Most of the time it was my wife. She is my rock. She has probably kept me out of jails more time than not in the last 4.5 years. But there were some friends and family, but because of my, my family legacy and because of who I was, I lost a lot of respect when I left the job, both professionally and people who were personally connected to me through the job. So it was hard. But at one point my wife's like, you gotta find a reason. And that's one day I was surfing on Facebook and I saw a group that didn't have a lot of members advocating for PTSD for first responders. I don't remember the name of it at this point, but it was a smaller group. And I'm like, oh, I can do that. I'm talking about myself. I'll open a group. And so I started this Facebook group back in the beginning of 2016. It's called PTSD Awareness for First Responders and Veterans. And I'm like, I'll probably get like my friends list on Facebook to join.
Right.
And so I start this group, and as of this morning, we got almost 3,500 members on it internationally, from North America to Belgium and China and Australia, and it's just there for support. And so I get this like taste of like, wow, this is great. I'm doing something to help people. I'm still helping people.
Right.
And so it builds up and builds up. Like I said before, I was journaling. I turned my journaling into writing. I get more serious with it. I start creating a book, and I start doing group meetings through a hospital out by me called McLean's Hospital, where I was actually getting my trauma therapy. So now I'm talking in small men's group. I'm starting to like, guys are like, oh, this guy gets it. Hey, this guy's talking about it. And I'm really starting to feel, I won't say I got like a purpose again. You know what I mean? I'm doing these different things where I'm still, I'm still a helper. I'm still a fixer. I'm going out there and I'm helping people. So that sort of was like the beginning, the root system for, what kind of has led to what I do a lot of today.
Yeah. So when you're going through all that stuff and you're trying to figure out where you're going, and you determine that you have a mission again, you have something that you need to do, which is cool. But did you feel that your department, your agency, whatever, they kind of left you out to dry? Did you ever get to that point?
Oh yeah. Oh, 100%. I had a lot of anger towards the departments and the agencies I worked for years. And there was no final ride for me. There was no signing off in the air one last time. There was no retirement parties. It was one of those things that because of the way I was acting and also the way people were acting towards me, it was like, oh, you're leaving, cool, bye. And I just kind of went by the door side, and before you know it, I was gone. So for years, I was very angry towards both jobs. I felt very abandoned by them, very dismissed. And, it was hard because then I'm battling this identity issue. And now I was like, oh, maybe I never should have been a firefighter. And, I know now that's not the case, but,
right.
all these things go through your head when you're sitting on that couch. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's a group and guy that we had previously on the podcast named Randy Sutton, and he started a group called the Wounded Blue, and it's for police officers who've been injured or have had various reasons to leave, and their departments just hung them out to dry and just said, hey, thanks. And the problem is at least in my estimation, the way I see it, is that there are a bunch of things for veterans. There's, you get out of the military and you're still struggling with PTSD or medical issues or whatever. You have the VA. You can go to the VA. The VA will support you, help you out, to whatever extent that they will. Firefighters, police officers, EMTs don't have that. We go through this different thing because cities, especially municipalities, or you get your county, or your whatever, they don't have these gigantic nonstop budgets where they can just keep, plumbing into somebody's, welfare and their care long after they're no longer working for the city or the county or whatever. And that's what we struggle with, is we see all these different things. We see PTSD, and we see burning babies. We see car crashes that are horrible. You see people that have committed suicide. You have all these different things, and yet we have and it sticks with us forever. And, you can, I'm sure there's things you can go back and you see vividly in your head that, yep, just like it was yesterday. I remember it. But you can't get rid of it. How do you get rid of it? So we have to take care of ourselves. We have to look after ourselves. There's organizations, such as yours, or, there's tons of organizations that want to help each other and just give you a chance just to open up and let you know, hey, I've had these problems. I opened up and this helped me. Maybe that will give somebody else the opportunity to see that, maybe I won't just be quiet over here in the corner and just get the donuts when they say I can go get a donut, and that makes the difference. And, unfortunately there's just too many guys and girls who are just struggling, and they don't have a way out. They don't know where to go with it. And, obviously you were able to find that, but there's just some people just can't do that. And not because of their own fault, but because they're at the point where they don't know where to go. How do you get yourself out of a rut? Obviously you had your wife, you said, but how do you get yourself out of a rut? Because there's also a side where you have to say, okay, I am going to go. I am going to step forward, even if they're pushing you. But
it's you can support someone as much as you want, and you can encourage people to do things, but that person has to want to change, right?
Yeah.
It's like trying to get someone to have, get a gym membership and go. It's the same with mental health. Physical health, mental health are very, they're almost one-on-one, and it's having the resources, utilizing the resources are different, but also, it's, especially with PTSD, and especially, with what they're seeing with complex PTSD, it becomes a behavior. Because of what you're doing, because of your body's going through a trauma response, you develop a mood, which becomes, an attitude, which becomes a behavior, which becomes your personality that you're portraying to everyone around you. So you're in protect mode on yourself, your flight or flight's going. So you're creating this personality, which, you kind of know you're in a rut.
Yeah.
But to change, means you're going to be uncomfortable. And right now, because you spend so much time being a miserable prick all the time, you're comfortable with that in a sense. You're quote unquote comfortable with being that miserable, trauma burdened person. So changing and being like, oh, if I get help, it's going to make me feel better. Well, feeling better is scary.
Right.
Is it more scary than what I've been through? I don't know, but it could be.
Right. And do you want to feel better? Are you just content in your sorrow and in your wallow? Are you content there? Because some people are. They're just, I don't want to.
It's a real question.
Yeah.
Seriously. I mean, and it is. I deal with it, with the different things I do now as, with peer support groups and different things. We see it now with people. It's like, wow, do you really want to stay where you are? Like, I get it. I've been there a lot.
Yeah.
I lived there for decades. Like, I understand, but to see it from the other side, now that I'm not necessarily the one, I mean, I have to do self-care every day. I have to continue to do what I need to do, but I'm not the one in crisis. I'm not the one, buried in the sand up past my forehead. I'm out of it.
Right.
But to see it from the other side, it's like, oh, wow, I was that difficult. That's why, that's why I didn't get help. That's why no one knew to get me help, because I wasn't approachable. I didn't want to get help. I kept spinning the thing, whatever it was.
Yeah.
It's really hard. Is there a direct answer for how do you get out of a rut? There isn't. There's no magic pill.
And everybody's different.
There's no magic question.
Yeah.
It all comes down to support. And that's kind of what a lot of us are trying to do these days, is create that, break down that stigma and like get it out there that, hey, we all have a brain. We're all humans. We signed up for a job where we're going to repeatedly see trauma on a 300% higher rate than the average civilian.
Mm-hmm.
How is it not going to affect us? Let's talk about this. You know what I mean?
Right. You think about, all that stuff. And there's a guy named Tim Larkin. I don't know, you might be familiar with him. He wrote a book called When Violence is the Answer. And one of the stories that he tells in the opening portion of the book is the lobster, or the crab, I guess more so than the lobster, but the crab who, as they grow, they grow and they get too uncomfortable for their shell. And what do? They molt that shell. They get it off so then it comes back. Because inside of a crab shell, it's just soft and mushy, and that's the part we like to eat. But it's all soft and mushy. However, their uncomfortability gets to the point because their shell is tight and they're growing, and yet there's progress, and yet the shell is keeping them down. And as humans, what would we go do? We would go to the doctor, like, "Hey, doc, I'm uncomfortable. I need to figure this out." And they would say, "Okay, well, here's a pill. Here's Prozac, or here's whatever." And then you lose whatever. And so they don't even think about that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden you get, you're not growing anymore because I don't need to grow because I'm fine. I'm right where I'm at. And so what do? You're going to die right in that spot, or you're just going to become useless because you're not progressing. You're not growing. You have to get uncomfortable. If you get uncomfortable enough, you're going to move. It's just like someone going to punch you in the face. What's your natural instinct? Move out of the way, right? Because that's uncomfortable. Somebody's fist getting that close to your face. So you have to progress yourself and you have to move. And like you said, you got to have somebody that's willing to come up beside you, support somewhere, and say they might have to remind you. You have to move at this point. It's a coach in your corner. It's your manager in your corner. They're telling you, shuck and jive or move or whatever you got to do. And so that's the fact that you have that. You had that in your wife. You had that in the fact that you said, okay, I'm going to go look for it and go find somebody that's willing to talk to you about it. And you're able to open up with them. And it can't just be anybody. You have to be comfortable with them. You have to be.
Absolutely.
Because you don't know who you can trust. And that's just human nature. Is we just don't know what we don't know. And so.
Yeah. Yep.
So you've talked about a couple things here that really kind of struck me. One is you said you started journaling, and so when you journal, so this is, and I'm more or less I'm going to ask that you give us an introductory to journaling, because I know that writing things down makes the difference. If you write it down, and even though you're like, oh my gosh, you look back 5 years, what an idiot, what a dork, whatever. How do you journal? What do you do for journaling?
Yeah, I tell you, I went through most of my high school career reading the Cliff Notes, the little books they used to give out on a big thick book, so you wouldn't have to read the book.
Right.
That's how I got through all my book reports in high school. So when I started journaling, like I went to college and all this other stuff, and I know how to write, but like to sit there and be like, okay, so how do I journal? How do I make an entry for today? And that's what I decided. Like, I'm not going to do this like a My Dear Diary. I'm not going to do this like a Teeny Bopper's,
right?
Black and white in the notebook. I just started writing. I honestly, it was like I was up at Onsite Academy, and I had a lot of free time here and there, and I just started writing. And it was like, okay, I put the date, but it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to come in tomorrow at 9:00 and write again. It was more like I just started writing, and it flowed in. It's not like a paragraph, you know what I mean? I read like a paragraph, what I did today. So today we did meditation. I actually tried yoga, found out my leg can't get behind my head, stuff like that. It was kind of funny at first. I was like, hey, this will make me laugh when I look back at it.
Right.
And then, before I knew it, within a month, I was writing, 6 pages, 10 pages of a journal entry, quote unquote. So like right around that time, about the end of 2015, I started realizing I was writing chapters. Wow. And it just started flowing. I was like, oh, I can do this. These aren't just journal entries. This is like, these are chapters. These are stories in my life. It was crazy.
Right.
I'd never written that much in my life up to that point.
Were you noticing that it was assisting? I mean, the fact that you're writing, you're trying to get your punctuation right, so you can obviously read this later. And did you think how if somebody else is going to read this at some point, or did you know it was just for you and nobody else is going to read it? And then if so, was your punctuation right and your spelling and all this different, grammar stuff to where you knew that, if somebody else did write it, it would make sense to them? Or did you just not care and say, I'm just getting stuff out on paper?
At first it was kind of like, verbal diarrhea. It was like, just get it out, man. Just get it out. And I look back in, the initial stages, because I obviously, started as handwriting. And then when I started getting more serious, I transferred everything to a Word document and started doing that. It was really, the whole process was very cathartic. I found a lot of healing, and I found as I started talking about more, whether it be stuff in the job or, personal stuff or whatever it is, I found that I was actually dealing with it with my therapist, with my trauma therapist, and like in the groups I would go to, and like, whatever it is, I was actually hashing it out because I had already done so in writing, like, spilled out the details in writing. And then I would sit there and like, be like, oh, this is how I debrief this. Okay. I'm a little bit more at peace with that.
Yeah.
And, but I ended up finding, probably pretty early on, and my wife still reminds me, I actually found a knack for writing. Like I was able to actually form things, and it wasn't all just, Keith speak.
Yeah.
A lot of times, if you ever read anything on Chris Kyle, a lot of times when he talks about his book and the way he wrote it, he always says like Kyle speak or Chris speak.
Yeah.
And he always thought the way he wrote, even if you didn't know who Chris Kyle was, you could read his book and you could tell he was from Texas.
Oh yeah.
And there's things on that where he does interviews and he talks about it. And that's kind of like when you read my stuff, people have read my stuff. It's like, oh, you are so from Boston. You are such a Boston guy.
Yeah.
Your book is wicked pissa.
Yeah.
And it's, people say it's like, yeah, it's in Keith speak, but it's not like, caveman talk. It's
right.
I actually do pretty good with it. And that sort of fueled me. I started writing, and before I knew it, I had 100 pages. And then now I have 600, and it's like, holy crap, it's my life story.
Yeah. I mean, there's other authors that are just like that. You got Daniel Defoe wrote Robinson Crusoe, or you got Mark Twain or something like that. And you just see the way that they're writing it. And sometimes it's difficult to read. Like Daniel Defoe is difficult to read. However, you'll take Mark Twain and you can figure it out, especially if you put yourself back in the time frame in which it was written.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. And it actually, there might be a better, I guess a more digestible way of that being the way that it is, because now it puts you in that position of who you are, and it puts you in. So you're putting yourself in, let's say you're putting yourself in Boston at this point, because you're listening and you're reading the way that person is, and you start hearing the voice. And now being that you're on podcasts, you're doing interviews and stuff, people can hear your voice. So when your book does come out, they're going to be hearing your voice reading it, much more than even if it
makes sense. He does say wicked piss. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's cool. And, a lot of people say, write it down. You got something, write it down. You got an issue, write it down. And that makes a total, just a ton of sense to me. So, another thing that you mentioned, and it's just slipping my mind here because I'm just now thinking about it, was, shoot. I'm going back and trying to remember what we were talking about a second ago, and it reminded me of a question I wanted to ask. But as far as having that mission, having that purpose, having that meaning, you think about when people go through different stuff. They go through, whether it's vets coming back from Middle East, or you got a firefighter, or you got a police officer, somebody that's gone through a prolonged amount of crap. And then all of a sudden you don't have that anymore. And now you're struggling to try to figure out what you're doing. And that's why you're sitting on the couch. I think it's important that a man, a woman, anybody who's spent their life doing something for somebody else, they have something to do. What is your, I guess, take on needing a man needing a mission?
And it is so vital to a meaningful life. It really is. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a job. I mean, it could be, something you do, but I found out in a very hard, abrupt way that I had put in so much focus on the title that I was and the job that I did that I didn't know who I was as a man. Beyond being a father, beyond being a husband, a son, all I knew myself as was a firefighter. I never had looked inward to who I am, to what made me able to be a firefighter, to what made me able to be a dad, to what made me be able to be a husband. And then now, these days, being able to look back and be like, I know why I could do those things, because now, even though I'm not doing the job anymore, and I went through all that I did, the kind of person I am is what's guiding me to do what I'm currently doing in my life.
Right.
And that person was there even when I was in the shit. And that is why I am the way I am, because that's who I am. I am a helper. You know what I mean? I am a good person. I am a strong person. I am a motivating person. I am an inspirational person. And that is who I am. I'm not necessarily a firefighter, but I'm all those things. And that's why I'm a firefighter. Right. And that's why certain people are police officers. And that's why people get in the EMS and join the military, because that is what they are as a person.
Yeah. And you don't think about that. And we that is the epitome of what I was hoping this podcast would be. We develop, we see these people, they're firefighters, they're police officers, they're nurses, they're teachers, they're vets, these people that have done so much. But why do we do so much? Why do we do that? Why do we go out of our way? Why did we grow up? That's why I start this thing, and I try to go chronologically to go back to try to figure out who the kid was, because there's a point where that kid's still there. There's still a mental side of that kid being there, because you're thinking of that. However, how did you grow into becoming the guy, the girl that you are now, in which you are sacrificing everything for somebody else? Where did that come from? And then if that gets taken away, where you don't have the ability, you're not being called. You're not being called the first one to, hey, this thing happened. We need you to go there and fix it. You're not being called to do that anymore. And where do you go with that? And since that's not your mission, you still got to have something inside of you that tells you who you are. There's some intrinsic value that you give yourself that says, I'm still the hero that I was because my character says I am that. Why did it manifest in you that way? Can you pinpoint the time frame? Is it just because, that's what my family's always done, and then it kind of developed from there? Or was there something more that you can determine?
I think, and honestly, when it comes to, this such a hard loss of identity, that point where I lost that identity, that not needing to be on point all the time, all of that, I think it was in me from, going back all the way to my childhood. I was, a lot of what they're doing now, research with PTSD in the fire service, at least, is they're finding that almost 75% of at least male firefighters have childhood trauma who are experiencing PTSD symptoms. It goes back, and I've done a ton of work on a lot of my stuff, and obviously my childhood stuff, and a lot of that, like, needing to matter, that needing to help, that needing to be the point guy, the first person in the door all the time, all my life, no matter who I was with, I was always the first person in the door, even when I wasn't on the job. You know what I mean? Those little things, all that stuff comes from being an underdog as a kid and wanting to help the other underdogs in society. And I think that's a common subconscious thing with a lot of men and women who get into this job, is they were already the underdogs, and they want to be there for the underdogs of society. They want to be the first person in the door. They want to be the help that comes around that corner, because no one was there to help them, and no one was there to help me. Yeah.
And it's not and that's not like you had some horrible childhood. You had stuff. It was good. You talked about, enjoying rolling hose at 12 or whatever, you played outside. You did. However, there's still, like you said, that doesn't mean that you didn't go through crap when you got into school. You got bullies, you got other stuff, you got girls rejecting you, or however it was, whatever your mindset was. And yeah, that it sticks with you, and you forget. It kind of sits there, and then you forget about it, but there's still the lingering feel about it. the feeling that just kind of stays there. And then all of a sudden next thing you know, you're 35 years old and you're struggling through some other issue.
Right. Simplest thing, like balancing your checkbook is always a joke, right? Like you can put me in a burning building or in the back with 6 dead kids, and I'll shine. I'll be your knight. Mm-hmm. You give me to balance that checkbook every month, and I'm going to throw it against the wall and probably break a glass or something in the meantime.
Right, and try to figure out why whatever bill is as high as it is, or some stupid thing, and
who's leaving the light on, who's touching my thermostat, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I don't know. You're right. We can go through this major thing, a shooting or car crash with dead bodies and burning whatever and all this different stuff, and you face it head on, and you go and you're stoic about it, and you do the job because you're able to just focus on what you need to do. But the minute that we get our emotions involved, I think that really causes us to second guess ourselves, second step ourselves, and then try to figure out how we can do something better, or am I even meant to do this? Am I supposed to be something better or something more? And you question yourself sometimes, but
all the time, yeah, you do, and it's like when there's no resources, there's no one there to put their hand down into that wormhole to pull you out. You question everything. What is my purpose here? Why am I doing? Why did I get on the department? Why am I working on the sandbox? Why did I pull another shift? Why did I do this? Why did I get married? Everything.
Yeah. And I just got done reading a book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. And in the book, he talks about, and he was a survivor from Auschwitz and Dachau and 2 other camps. But he'd been in 4 concentration camps. He survived that. But he talks about how our search for meaning is one thing, then our search for purpose is another. And he doesn't expound on purpose so much as he goes over meaning, and he goes from a therapist standpoint, and he really delves into our meaning is comparative to what everything else that's happening in our lives. So like he tells the story about a guy that talks about his wife passed away, and he's so distraught and he just can't handle it. She'd been passed away for a couple of years now, and he just can't get over it, and he's so distraught and depressed about it. And then so he brings up the whole thing. Okay, so what would happen if you were the one who had passed away, and she had to live through you doing that? He goes, oh, she would be absolutely totally destroyed. She would just be beside herself and kill herself on, just not literally kill herself, just beat herself up and be so in such a bad, dark place. And he goes, aren't you glad that you are able to spare her that tragedy, that she doesn't have to go through that now? And so he just kind of turned it around on her that, look, you're able to handle this. She obviously wouldn't have been able to handle it per you. So look at things from a different angle sometimes. And so that is your search for meaning, is looking at, things happen, whatever sucky thing comes along the way. What would be the alternative if this hadn't happened? If this happened in another angle, because this obviously had to happen. It's something that was going to happen no matter what or whatever. Look at it from a different angle, and put different lens on and look at it from there, and that will change your definition of meaning, of why things are happening and all this different stuff. Now, your purpose is a totally different thing. Everybody has their own purpose, and you've got to determine your purpose based off of your passions and your loves and your likes and who you are. Character has a lot to do with it. So that really brought about a profound understanding of things. The big thing is now you have to determine your purpose. Your meaning is there. Meaning is a big story. It's the big picture. The purpose is you're more focused. So, when you're talking about this, it makes a difference to, when you start thinking about what is your purpose? What is...
Right. It's a big question. And now that I've been doing this for a little bit, and now I do what I do with, doing podcasts and, public speaking and different things. I've had the opportunity to speak with different men and women who are like, wow, when you talk about like purpose, and when you bring up purpose, I always just consider myself, my purpose to be the job. I never had thought about it until today. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't. And then when you do it, it doesn't mean you have to leave the job. It doesn't mean you're going to love the job any less if you're still on it. But when you take that step and you're like, okay, that is not who I am as a man.
Yeah.
It is what I do as a man, but it is not who I am as a man. and it can really turn your life around. And that's really been sort of the tail end of my story these days has been, I've gotten, I really got into mindfulness and like meditating and living in the moment. And I really harped on who I was as a man. I was able to dig into that and find that out. And I now live, as compared to as little as 2 years ago, I live such a happier life because I do know who I am.
Yeah.
And, that opportunity is there for, our brothers and sisters still on the job to be able to know who they are and have some longevity in the job, before the traumas build up and that kills their career or their marriage or their relationship with their kids or whatever it may be. That, finding that purpose, that real purpose could really define a man or a woman's life and their career.
Right. And, your career could be the side thing, the thing that just puts keeps the lights on and puts food on the table. That could be, but you enjoy doing that. And then your purpose could be something else. You could still be doing that and still you can go be running, sessions where, people are talking, or you can start that bowling league or whatever that you wanted to do. And now, and that really keeps people, that gives them something to do. It gives a purpose to do, it makes a huge difference having that purpose. I've talked about having those people who come alongside you, and you said support is huge, and it is. And I liken it to, a big ship coming into port and that little tugboat that has to come alongside and keep them on the straight and push them, into where they need to go so they can get refueled and resupplied and stuff. That's what somebody is. And sometimes that's all you are. That's all you need to be, is a tugboat, and just being there to help somebody get into the difficult spot that they're in, because everything seems so much bigger than what it is. And just realize, hey, you're actually, it's not as bad as you think. And you get that support going for you. It's huge.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, like I said earlier, we are all, in order for change to happen, we have to do it. No one's going to do it for us. Somebody can start it, but it's not going to be the permanent change we need. We have to make those changes in our behaviors and our personalities and our routines that are causing these things to affect our lives. And we have to do it. And every human being can change their life. Every human being has the capability to make decisions that will make them happier.
Right.
They do. They all have it.
Right. So you get into, you're getting into doing a PTSD, or not the PTSD thing, but more of a kind of a sounding board sort of thing. And you're by journaling and you're writing, and you start getting into some public speaking. How did you get into that? How did you get into, and what do you talk about specifically?
So that's a pretty recent thing. It was supposed to actually happen. This first symposium that I did up here in New Hampshire, it was actually supposed to happen April of 2020, right as we get hit with COVID. And, so COVID hits and everyone's like, oh, we can't be in the same spot as someone else. So everything is put on hold. Right. And so I get built up. I meet with the director. I become friends with the director at the time of the fire academy. And we're building this up. We're getting excited. I'm I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to help people. And then yeah, just kidding. We got COVID. So it gets put on hold. A lot of time goes by. I'm still doing other things that I'm doing. I haven't gotten into, the public part of it. I haven't done any podcasts yet, but I'm doing media, social media stuff. I finally have enough in 2021, right around the same time, around April. And I start emailing the governor, and I end up getting put back in contact with the same director that we were going to do before. It's hey, great news. We're back on for September. And I'm awesome. That's 5 months away. What are we doing in the meantime? And she's oh, okay. So me and the other gentleman that I ended up presenting with at the symposium, we ended up doing a class at the fire academy. And so we ended up holding this class. They had 75, 80 people in it, which was great for a classroom. Mm-hmm. And we just, we used the same format for this classroom as we ended up doing for the larger symposium. And it was just me and this other guy, Steve, telling our story. Steve is he's a firefighter and medic, and also a 3-tour Marine. So he brings the military aspect into the first responder life. Mm-hmm. And so we're just up there telling our story. And, my wife was in the crowd. Some of the guys from my peer support group were in the crowd. They came up from Mass to see it. And, at one point they go, after everything's done, after we do our presentations, Guy, not one head turned while you're up there. Everyone was on their seat. Everyone was listening to you. And when it was done, I can't even tell you how many men and women came up to me holy shit, hey, thanks for talking.
Yeah.
Thanks for saying this. Thanks for having the balls to go up there in front of us all and bury yourself like you just did.
That's cool.
And like, you know, it was crazy. It was crazy. Then the symposium, it was even on a larger scale. I mean, I was, you know, administrators, commissioners, chiefs, you know, whatever it was, you know, salty veterans, new guys, academy graduate, everyone in between, men, women, cops, you know, everyone was like, holy crap, you guys are awesome. And it's sort of just become like this thing where it's like, okay, well, I'm cool. I'm at a point in my life where I'll talk about whatever with whoever. I'll tell anyone any part of my story. If it's going to help someone, I'll keep doing it.
Heck yeah.
And that's what sort of where I'm at now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's awesome. Because I think, you know, you were talking about how go to debriefs and stuff where people just won't say anything and nobody wants to really open up. And I've had the same conversation with a couple other guests on here, and nobody does. If you go to those and one person is willing to step out and say, hey, you know what? So this is how it bothered me, and they're willing to open up, it's going to open up for a whole bunch of other people. And so that's what it seemed like for me. What you were just saying is that you have all these attendees, they're listening to what you have to say, and hey, thanks for saying that, because it's probably something that they've been thinking about, feeling, or whatever for so long, and they see somebody with the guts willing to just not care and say, you know what, this is what happened, and this is how I feel about it, and this is why it sucks, and this is what you should do if it happens to you. And a lot of times, you know, just having one person open up, and if you're that one person that's willing to be that person open up, that might make a huge difference for people.
It's you know, the feedback we've gotten from the two I've done up here in New Hampshire has been impressive. Right within a week after the first class when we did, the director actually reached out and said, hey, I've had like 6 people reach out and ask where I can get help. Mm-hmm. And I was like, thank God, about time. Like, yes, absolutely, you know? Yeah. And, you know, since this time, there has been organizations that were sort of already in existence that have now built up what they do and have started, you know, getting themselves as a resource out to departments, you know, things that weren't happening a year ago that have been happening now in the last 6 to 8 months. And it's all just great stuff. You know, it's very empowering for those of us who are out there trying to spread the word that, hey, there's help, there's support. You know, you don't have to be like this. You don't have to lose your job, your life, your marriage, whatever it is. You don't have to drink yourself, sleep every night.
And you're not going through it alone.
You're not alone.
There's other people out there that have either gone through it or going through it, or they've seen it and they know how to navigate it. And it's huge to have that. So that's really cool. That is awesome. So one other person, somebody you've mentioned, I don't know, several times so far, that seems to be kind of the hub for everything that you got going on, and that's your wife. You talk about her. You've talked about her so many times. How did you meet her? How did that come about?
So we actually met on the ambulance, and we met when I was working in. I don't know if you've heard of the Worcester Six. 6 firefighters that got killed in 1999. So Worcester is a city in the center of Massachusetts, about 200,000 people, good sized city. We were both working on the ambulance down there, and we met. My wife is actually 12 years younger than me. That's right. Kudos to me. I know. So I was in my early 30s and she had just turned 20 when we met, and I had just gone through a really rough patch, and she was, I don't know if she was very open-minded when she met me, but when she started hearing and learning a lot about where I had been and what I have done and sort of what is my family, I'm pretty sure I blew her hair back a little bit, and there may have been a moment of, this guy's got some baggage, you know, and, but yeah, we met on the job, and she worked as an EMT for a while, and she's actually, she does both ICU and ER as a nurse up by us.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And so she's been that, like you said, rock for you the whole time. She's your tugboat, in other words.
She is. She's a heavily armed tugboat, but she is my tugboat, man. She is an incredible woman, and she's had opportunities to leave. Let's just say there's other women who would have left a lot sooner. Yeah. And she hasn't. She's not saying we didn't have bad times. We've had a lot of rough times. And she has always told me from day one, when I first got diagnosed with PTSD, as long as you were working on getting better, I will stand by your side. And she hasn't left it, man. She hasn't left it. And thank God.
Yeah.
I love her. She's the best thing that's happened in my life.
Yeah. And I don't care what you're doing. I don't care if you're a firefighter, police officer, EMT in the military, a nurse, or, whatever. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You're doing something that's serving other people, that you're struggling, and you have the chance of developing PTSD or some kind of trauma. Having somebody in your life that is willing to support you and be there for you, that is your home base, that you can go back to at any point and you can open up and you trust them wholeheartedly. Having those people in your life makes a huge difference. So if you've got somebody and you're thinking about, and then I'm talking to my listeners right now, if you're thinking about, either leaving them, cheating on them, doing whatever, think about what your life would be without them. Think about how life is if you don't have that. And that makes a huge difference. And I applaud you for that. And, I've got a gold mine in my wife, and I think there's a lot of people that I know that say the same thing. And, it's just fantastic. You find that support, you find those people around you that are willing to make you better. Hold on to them.
Amen. They're hard to find.
Yeah. But that's the whole thing of it. Because they're hard to find, they're worth it. Just like,
absolutely,
you're digging for gold, you're not always going to find it, but once you do, it's worth it. So,
you got to hold on to it.
Yeah. So are you thinking the book will be done this year? Or?
So it's looking like I've sort of gotten more motivation with it in the last little bit. I actually, I haven't made it, officially official, but I actually reconnected with a kid I went to school with who works in Hollywood now, and he's a producer and an agent. Does different things, and we had talks. I kind of hit a roadblock with doing more, and I was like, hey, I don't know what we need to do, but I think we need to get Hollywood involved to try to do something, a documentary, something big to try to get some eyes on this. And in the end, he ended up telling me that he buys the life rights to people's stories and produces them, or goes through another guy to produce them. And so we're actually working on maybe doing something with that. And so when I started talking to him, he's like, hey, where's your book at? Because he follows me on Facebook. We stay in touch a little bit. And I'm like, I don't know, I want to get it out, but it's my life story, you know what I mean? He's like, yeah, but you speak publicly about this stuff. You've already said all this.
Right. And
I'm like, yeah, I know. He goes, well, let's get it done. So between him and another person, the plan is to bang this out, hopefully by maybe even summertime, depending on the process. Cause it's not edited. It's still in quote unquote Keith speak.
It's still in Keith speak. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool though. I mean, it's not every day that people write a book. If you say, "Hey, I got a book here," and I've talked to several authors on here and in person, and I know quite a few, and just having that, and then being the fact that it's your life story, and you're able to look back at it, and you can read and you can learn about somebody, and by learning about somebody and the stuff that they've gone through, you can learn a lot about yourself. You don't realize that how close that we all are as people. A lot of the stuff that we do the same thing, but then we're different. We're different just because of the way that the avenues that our life decides to take us.
It's true. It's very true. I've done the same thing when I've read books on people's lives. It's like, oh wow, okay, this guy's not even a firefighter, but yeah, wow, he gets it. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, because like you said, it's what you do. It's not who you are. Who we are, it's our character, our mindset, whether we're servants or we're takers. And there's people that are takers and they don't realize that that's not who they're meant to be. They're not meant to be. I meet people on the street all the time that, drug addicts, whatever, and they're not happy in their life because they have not found their meaning. They haven't found their purpose, and all they're doing is just whatever the next high they can find.
Yeah.
And they're ruining people's lives in the process. But then you show them, hey, you do this. And like, man, I felt good about doing that. It's right. And that's, I've met people who've gotten clean over the years who have determined that their life is going to be better. They do it. And all of a sudden they're the best people in the world because they're doing what God put them on this planet to do. And I think that's what it is. I think that's what it is.
Yep.
God put us on this planet for other people. And we have we have to do that for other people. So
I believe that too.
It's huge. What besides the book, what else have we got? What else are you looking forward to as things are coming on? Just the book and more speaking gigs, or?
So it's a lot. I like to talk about this stuff, and so I try to get myself in the speaking stuff, obviously, and the podcast sort of coming together as time goes on, and I do the peer support and I moderate on that and whatnot. But I actually, it was a weird part of my life late last fall. I got creeped on Facebook, and this woman reaches out to me and she's like, "Hey, we're a member of the same first responder PTSD group," because I belong to like 3 dozen of them or so. And she's like, "You're actually in my area." I'm like, "Oh, here it comes. Here comes the home wrecker, right?"
Home wrecker, or they want $1 million. They want all your money.
Yeah. What's your credit card information?
That's right.
That wasn't what it was. She ended up being a law enforcement spouse. Her husband was 15-year law enforcement and went on a PTSD, very similar story to mine. And she ended up, long story, extremely bridged. She ended up reaching out to a life coach when she ended up, she was an English teacher by trade. Mm-hmm. When everything on the house fell on her shoulders, children, finances, handling her husband, everything. Mm-hmm. She reached out to a life coach and got her life back on course. And so she ended up starting her own life coaching business, and it's called First Responder Coaching. That's geared specifically towards first responders. And so she reaches out to me and she's like, "So, I see that you do public speakings. You're very, very candid on Facebook. You're open about stuff. You basically, all your posts are very motivating and blah, blah, blah. I'm looking for someone to kind of, partner with me to kind of be like my street cred, my image of what this is." And so, we ended up meeting, and, I'm kind of an on-guard guy, and I still have my guard up when I meet her, and we ended up connecting really well. And so we've partnered with her coaching business to sort of get this other resource out to first responders. And coaching, I'm a stubborn Irishman. I come from a very disciplined family. Therapy obviously was very hard for me in the beginning.
Sure.
Members of my family don't talk about, all that stuff, voodoo stuff, whatever. I didn't believe in yoga at first. I didn't believe in meditation at first, but now I'm sold. So I'm hearing coaching. I'm like, what is this? And it's in the simplest ways, it's a conversation. It's what we've been doing for the last hour and 40 minutes.
Right.
It's a conversation with someone where you're not having someone who knows what the answer is, who's trying to get you to it. Uh-huh. They're guiding you along the way to let you make those decisions on your own to find that answer, which ends up being so empowering. And what we ended up doing was she ended up coaching me for a number of months, going through coaching sessions. And a lot of what I did as success in the last 3 months have been because of this. The better communication with my wife, better relationships with my kids, reaching out to Hollywood, motivating to do my book, starting up different things, were because I became so much more empowered by feeling accomplishments and setting goals. And so we partnered, and now I'm working with this woman to help get this word out, to help get this resource out to people, because it's not therapy. It's not sitting on a couch staring at a ceiling being like, "What are you sad about today?" It's just having a conversation with someone. And the nice thing with this business is not only is it, specifically for first responders, but all the coaches that anyone who becomes a client works with are from the first responder world themselves. Yeah. They're either first responders or spouses or family. So it's like this common ground, and it's just this unused, untapped resource that a lot of people don't know about. And with the mental health crisis in this country and the world, those resources are taxed. I mean, this 3 to 6 month waiting list right now for people to talk to a counselor. And so trying to get more resources out there, whatever they are, I think is huge these days. And that's sort of what I do now. And now officially I'm her director of business development. So I have like this new title where it's not fire related. And I'm like, do I like it? Am I okay with that? Is that something I can do? And like, does it involve having to wear a helmet or gear at night? And she's like, "No, you're an idiot." And that's not, no, come on.
And you get weekends off. You get birthdays off. You get nights off and holidays.
Running out the door in the middle of the night, trying to put on my socks and pants. It's
right.
So yeah, no, we're just trying to get resources out there, man. That's what all this is about.
That's cool. And what's it called again?
So it's called First Responder Coaching. And the website is 1st respondercoaching.org.
1ST respondercoaching.org. So that's cool. That is, like you said, there's not a lot of them, but there are ones, and the ones that are out there they're good. They know what they're doing. And a lot of them have been going from just based off of experience. They've been through a crap, and they know how to navigate that crap. And so, I mean, I've had several on here between Wounded Blue and Michael Segru being on here, and let me see, we got the peer support couple, Irish Angel. I mean, I can go down the line. All these guys have been on here, these guys and girls, and they know how to care. And if you reach out to them, they're willing to help you out. And so, same thing here with First Responder Coaching. Check them out. So,
absolutely,
yeah. So, well, Keith, I want to thank you for coming on. This has been this has been a fantastic talk. I've really enjoyed it. I get coming in thinking, okay, it's firefighter. Where are they going to talk about? You did say put wet stuff on the red stuff, which is I like to use that line myself, and so that's perfect. So yeah, but this has been just a fantastic conversation, and I appreciate you coming on. It's been really great. So.
This has been great, man. I really enjoyed myself, and I appreciate coming on. And at some point down the road, I'd love to come back and talk to you again.
Absolutely. You're more than welcome to. I leave an open invitation to anybody come on. So when things come up, when things start, coming to fruition, the book and everything else, and you have a Hollywood credit behind your name, maybe we get you back in here. So I'd be happy to.
That sounds great.
Yeah, bring you on here, and if we need to, we can interview your wife if we have to, and have her come on and talk about her messed up life.
Yeah, dealing with me 24/7. She's got a book herself just on that.
Yeah, I bet. So, hey, look, we've been talking about several, various things: firefighters, EMTs, police officers, military veterans. If you are one of those, I want to say thank you so much for who you guys are. Everything you guys do to make sure that we live in a country in which we can be proud of, we can feel safe in, all that stuff, where we know that there are people that are willing to put their life on the line for other people, because that's what we do. That's what our job is on this planet, is to serve other people. And if you don't think so, consider that. Consider why it is you do what you do. Consider why it is, and even if you're not a first responder or anything, but anything you do, you're doing something for somebody else. You talk about the service industry, from servers to cooks to all that stuff like that, hotel concierge, or we do things for other people. Our job to get paid, you serve other people. Now, go beyond that and make it a part of you to serve other people. That makes a huge difference, because when you're starting to do it from your heart and from your character, you're developing your mission, just like we've been talking about. You're developing your passion. What is that? The ability for us to serve other people. There's nothing like it. That's what God called us to do, is do things for other people on this planet. So when you see somebody struggling, somebody that you love, or somebody that you are close to, you see them struggling, your job is to go up beside them and help them through it. You see somebody that needs something, you need some help, you go and you help them do it. You see an old lady that needs to cross the street, you go help her do that, right? So the same thing applies for those people who are struggling. They might be just trying to struggle how to get off their couch, like Keith was talking about. Those are the people in which need our help. And so for firefighters, EMTs, police officers, our veterans, thank you so much for everything you do, keeping us safe, holding that line to make sure that we are the country that we are, and we're able to live here free and safe. We appreciate you. And to our nurses and our teachers, you guys and girls that do that, the teachers, you're helping our children become who they are. Our nurses, you guys are waiting for us to, when we get hurt, you're there to help patch us up. You and the doctors in the ERs and whatnot. You guys, I just can't, I don't have the words for it, but thank you so much for everything you do. And so with that, I just want to show our gratitude from the What's in Hero podcast to you guys. Thank you so much. All right, buddy. Well, any final words for everybody out there?
Just stay the path, man. Just stay the path and reach out and talk about it, man. It doesn't matter. We're all human. You know, we're all human.
Absolutely. So I appreciate it, Keith. So for Keith Hanks, I've been Ken Fraunfelter, and this has been the What's a Hero podcast. We are clear.